بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلواته وسلامه على النبي الأمين خاتم النبيين وإمام المتقين وعلى آله الطيبين وعلى أصحابه المتطهرين ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. Inshallah, we're going to continue reading tonight again from the work قواعد في تزكية النفس, the work about the 10 principles for purifying the soul. ونحن على الخامسة, we're now on the 5th قاعدة. And so the 5th قاعدة that Shaykh'Abd al-Razzāq, al-Muḥsin, al-Badr, Hafadhahullah Ta'ala, that he mentions is al-Tazkiyah. He says it's takhliya wa tahliya. So again, he likes to play with words a little bit to draw our attention and maybe to generate some curiosity. So he said, what purification is these two things. Awalan takhliya wa thaniyan tahliya. So they're the words themselves, they rhyme. This is something that, of course, the ulama of old, they always like to do. They like to put things together that rhyme because people will remember things because it's more catchy, right? So, takhliya and tahliya. And so he says in the tazkiyah, right, the reality or the way to obtain purification of the soul is what? Takhliyat an-nafs awwalan. So it is to remove things from the soul first and foremost. So the first step is to remove things that are going to, in some ways, defile the soul or render it into being a state of impure. بِتَطْهِيرْ مَا عَنِ الرَّذَائِلِ وَالْمَعَاصِي وَالذُّنُوبِ. So before he mentions there's 3 major things he wants us to look at. There's something called radha'il, like those things that defile the soul. Al-Ma'asi, acts of disobedience. The third he mentions is what? Dhunub, sins. But let's look at the first word that he talks about, takhliya. What is the meaning of takhliya? So he says, one, it's mustalaha. It's like a technical term that you will find used in different areas of law. And he mentions it as what? Al-ifrag wa takhliyatul makan, ifragahu wa raf' al-yad anhu. So imagine that, for instance, that the act of takhliya, of removing, he said it's like to clear a space, to make it open. So one of the ideas about what? To purify the soul is to remove things. So he says what this term takhliya is a istilaha, it's like a technical term. It means to what? To remove or clear a space. And also to raf' al-yad anhu. And so that you let it go. So this gives us an insight into the first step of purifying the soul from these things is that there's things we're going to have to let go in this life. Now that can be from the a'mal sayyat, like it can be from those evil things like fornication, or it can be like gambling or drinking or using foul language, however we can use our imagination. But the other part, they said, right? The other part is letting go. So what does it mean to let go? It means, sometimes the issue that we have of getting into a state of where our soul is becoming impure is because of the environments that we hang out in and the people that we hang out in those environments, that either we go to those bad places with them or they are means of taking us to them. So sometimes you just have to drop people like a bad habit, as they say, out of your life, and that's an important part of purifying the soul. And so that's why he gives us a little bit of insight into what is this takhliya. And that the part here that the Shaykh, may Allah Ta'ala bless him, he says there are these three key factors, al-Razzāq. So what does it mean for Ramadān from Radila is the Jama' of Radila. The word Radila means something that's depraved, we could say in English, like depravities. So what are these Radā'il? And so it denotes, for instance, some type of moral corruption, meaning a person's moral compass is now, it's out of alignment. And that, again, that comes from just in the way that if you have a very heavy magnet and you bring it into proximity to a compass, it will throw off the compass to be able to know which way is north. In the same way, our heart and our nafs, because Allah فَأَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا وَتَقَوَاهَا, Allah has created us inwardly to have an innate disposition and an innate intuition as to what is generally good and bad. Of course, there are things that are technically that we learn in the religion, but as a generality, we are created with a disposition to generally know what is right and what is wrong. But when we go into those environments that cause us to become impure or engage in acts that are impure or ideas or thoughts that are impure, like a compass, it begins to skew and it doesn't know which way is north. And so he said these are the things that we can think of that are not only ethical and immoral in a kind of abstract way, but he said this includes like committing heinous crimes, murder, theft, and other types of things. Acting cruelly, to behave cruel, whether that's to behave in a manner that's cruel towards a human being or even towards an animal. You will see some people that they will act cruelly towards an animal. They will beat it. They will starve it. And this is, we know, well know, there was one woman who led a certain kind of lifestyle that was haram, but she fed a dog that was starving, gave it some water, and Allah غَفَرَهَا ذَنْبَهَا. Allah Ta'ala forgave her of her sins. And another woman that starved some cats, even though she was musalliyah, that she will be one of the inhabitants of the fire. She prayed, but she was cruel to a cat, and she will have to face the punishment of the fire. So he said it can be, the Raḍā'il can be things like committing heinous crimes and being cruel and engaging in all kinds of perverse behavior. And again, today, perversion is celebrated. Even when I was young, I'm 51. In the 70s, perverse behavior, even though it would manifest, the general attitude, even in America, was that this is something that is what radila. It is something despicable, and there was no way of trying to twist it into something else, and it most certainly was not celebrated. We are now, نحن في زمان, right, عيد الرذائل. We're like in a time now where people unfortunately celebrate. So, and that's why we have to be even more cautious about who we hang around and where we hang around. And so also the Raḍā'il can be those things that cause suffering, right? That cause harm and suffering. And so it signifies a kind of deviation from the norm, and also to accept this radila, to accept this as the new norm, right? And so this is in some ways the easy hanging fruit. To give an example, is not so much the amal of the It's not the act of what the people of the LGBTQ do, but rather the real radila, the real despicable part is the change in the attitude of society to now celebrate it. So they have a month that we don't. They have a month in which some people choose to celebrate it. And this is part of what the Shaykh is calling the Raḍā'il. The second thing that he mentioned in this takhlit al-nafs, right, the removing things from the soul, is that removing what? Al-ma'asi, right? Acts of disobedience. He said, but this is not simply complying with the ahkam of Allah. Of course we have to comply with the ahkam of Allah. But on a deeper level, it is also the desire for something that does not belong to you. When we commit acts that are haram, when we disobey Allah, right, then we enter into what is called the hima Allah. And so the hadith is mentioned here in Sunan an-Nisa'i, in which the Prophet ﷺ is reported to have said, and we know this hadith, إِنَّ الْحَلَالَ بَيْنٍ وَالْحَرَامْ بَيْنٍ, like that which is permissible is clear, and that which is impermissible is clear. وَبَيْنَ ذَلِكَ أَمُورًا مُشْتَبِهَاتٍ, and of course in between them are things that are unclear and gray. And he said that, وَسَأَضْرِبُ فِي ذَلِكَ مَثَلًا, should I tell you or give you an example how you can comprehend what that gray area is? First off, know because it's a gray area, if you're not scrupulous about what you do, who you hang out with, the areas and the things that you associate with, eventually, like a ra'in, like a shepherd, you will steer your flock and they will start to graze on territory that you don't have any permission to do. So he says, في ذلك مثلا أن الله عز وجل حما حما. So he said that it's like Allah Ta'ala has his own private reserve. وفي الحماء الحرمات. And in this is where those things that are not permissible to do reside. وإن حماء الله ما حرم إنه من يدعى حول الحماء. And so likewise he said like the shepherd, the problem is if there's not a fence that's erected, well, I'll just let my sheep go here or there, but then you end up grazing on somebody's property that is not permissible. So in the same way that's like with what Allah Ta'ala has made haram, ما حرم Allah. He says, وَإِنَّهُمْ يَرْعَى حَوْلَ الْحِمَاءِ يُوشِكُ أَنَّ يُخَالِطُ الْحِمَاءِ. And then eventually you wind up getting mixed up in it. And so in a similar vein, the way that we get into acts of disobedience is that we are not scrupulous, and we become careless, and we become complacent until suddenly we find ourselves already on the other side of it, and now we have to make istighfar and tawbah, and we have to ask Allah Ta'ala for forgiveness. And then the third thing that he mentions is dhunub, which again might seem self-explanatory. Obviously he's talking about sins, but there's one interesting thing to ponder that I wanted to give you, because I was always a student of lugha, of language, when I was doing my studies, and I was always fascinated by the depth of the Arabic language. It always has incredible insights. And so for instance, dhunub, jama' dhanb, right? So the word dhunub is the plural of the singular dhanb, right? And this particular word is bunya ala al-wazn fa'al. Right, is constructed on the word fa'al. Now there's another very similar word that is dhanab. Dhanab bunya ala al-wazn fa'al. So we have dhanba and then dhanab. You know what the difference between, they share the same root, right? They share the same root. What's the difference between dhanbun wa dhanabun? Ma hu al-farq baynahuma? What does anybody know? Arab or Ajam? Anybody know what's the difference? Right?
One is a verb and one is a noun.
لا. كلهما اسم. Both of them are nouns. ذنب وذنب. You should know. Tanween is علامة الاسم, right? Come on. Man, I'm from Detroit, man. Come on. If I know this, y'all got to know this, man, right? What is ذنب وذنب? ذنب. ذنب اسم أيضا. Okay. We're getting closer. It can be like a tail, like of an animal, but also what? No, somebody said follower. Yeah, somebody that, but not just, it's not just a follower, like ittiba'. It's different. It's somebody like in a cult or a sect that blindly follows somebody else. That's being more, they follow because they're being led by somebody. There's also a third meaning that you can have from dhanabun. Dhanab. What's that? You know, in the movies, you watch you have a movie where there's a hero and he's fighting the villain. And the villain, right? Al-adu, like ladehi jaysh, he has an army. And the guys, we call them in English an NPC. The younger people will know NPC, right? Non-player character. They're just do whatever the evil guy does, the evil wizard, magician, whatever that's fighting the hero. They follow him blindly, and what do they do for him? They do his dirty work, right? They do all the evil things because the villain doesn't like to do the little things himself. So he has all these guys that run around and do all this stuff. How the huwa? Dhanab. So when we talk about dhunub, or fi sigat al-mufrad, dhanb, it is close to the idea of dhanab, meaning that one, you're like an animal. When you disobey Allah Ta'ala, you're like an animal, you're not thinking. So it's like you have a tail. So this is one of the meanings to extract. The second one about a blind follower, who are you following? Man tattabi'? La tattabi' khutawat al-shaytan. Don't follow in the footsteps of shaitan, because when you follow in the footsteps of shaitan, anta, what? You are a dhanab. Right? You are somebody blindly following from the hawa and the shahawat madmuma, from those blameworthy things. Or you're like part of the jaysh of the shayateen. Iblis has an army as well. He has followers. So when we disobey Allah Ta'ala, it's like we are enlisting in the army of Iblis. وَنَعُوذُ بِاللَّهِ مِنْ ذَلِكَ. And so that's just some of the few things that we can extract from that. And then now he gets to ثُمَّ تَحْلِيَتُهَا بَعْدَ ذَلِكَ بِفِعْلِ الطَّاعَاتِ وَالْقُرَبَاتِ. Now, so the one part is to remove those things. Remove, right, who we hang around, the bad influences. Remove the acts of disobedience, and remove those things that are like that cause impurities for the soul. Now it's the time for tahliya. What does tahliya mean? I know it's kind of cheating. I can't really, only the Arabs here, it's kind of cheating. But what does tahliya mean? Yeah, right. Because we love to, in the common speech, like in English, when we say something is cool, in Arabic, what do you say? Something is what? Hello. Right? That's sweet. That's cool, right? But really it's from the root of hala, or hala mean to be sweet. So that's why we call things like kunafa, they're what? Hilwiyat, right? They're part of the sweets. So he said the other part of purifying the soul, now that the izala, like you remove those things, the other part is to sweeten it up. So you have to sweeten your soul. You have to make it, you beautify it. You adorn your soul with what? Ta'at wal qurabat. Those things of acts of obedience, like salah, mithl al-siyam fi shahr Ramaḍān, aw, right? Or that what? To beautify it is what? An-nawafil. This is why the Prophet alayhi salam, إِذَا دَخَلَ الرَّجُلْ مِنَ الْبَدْرِ. There's a man from the Bedouin at the time of the Prophet alayhi salam. دخلوا في الإسلام وسأله عن الإسلام. And he began to ask him عن الفرائض. So what do I have to do? Okay, well there's خمس صلوات في اليوم والليلة. Like you have to pray 5 times and it's through the day and the night and on and on. And he said, do I have to increase this? إذا what? تطوع. He doesn't say, right, the language that the Prophet ﷺ used when he talked about extra acts that are not required, but we do them, it's really like if you were to translate it into English, it would be like voluntary acts of obedience. So when we obey Allah, لِلْفَرَائِدْ أو لِلْنَوَافِلْ, when we obey Allah, whether we're praying the 5 times daily prayer, or the mandatory siyam for those who are able to in the month of Ramadan, or paying our zakah, or anything from the wajibat, those things we have to do, okay, we call that's what it, but even when you do, like when you sali raka'atain ala dukhul tahit al-masjid, right? When you come in the masjid and you pray those 2 raka'at, this is we call nafila. They're not mandatory, but the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, what? Samma, he called it what? Tatawwa'. It's a voluntary act of obedience. So whether you're doing something required or not required, it's all what? At-ta'at. It's all obedience. And so when you get that in your mind, that my whole existence is about obeying Allah, whether those things that I'm demanded or not demanded, this is what I'm fulfilling. Now I am doing tahliyat an-nafs. I'm sweetening my soul. And so one young man today, we actually talked after Salat al-Jumu'ah, and I asked him how he was doing. He said, man, to be honest, I'm really feeling a kind of spiritual high, because during Ramadan, I've been able to conquer some dhunub that I had, some sins that I was doing, and some other bad things, and cutting off certain people. And even though it's still in the first week, and I said, hello, this is beautiful. This is a sweet thing. So when we obey Allah Ta'ala, we sweeten our soul literally like this. And so there are so many other things to add, but I don't want to take up a lot of time, and I know that people want to go home a little bit early, inshallah. I won't, but think of these things. It's so beautiful. If you think about it, he said that the last thing that I'll mention is that you cannot do these 2 things of takhliya and tahliya, right? The reason there's an order of takhliya, right, to remove those things that prevent you from tahliya. You cannot sweeten your soul while at the same time doing things that are forbidden and wrong and so on. In the same way, he says, mithl al-wudu'. He said you cannot make wudu' if you have some hadath. Like if you have some impurity. What? Ala al-libas, aw al-jasad, aw makan al-salah. If you have some impurity on your clothes, or on your body, or in the place of your prayer, you can wash water over your body all you want. وَلَكِنْ لَيْسَ هَذَا الْوُضُوء. This is not wudu'. So why is it that when we make wudu, min ahkam al-wudu, from the importance of knowing, so what? I have to first make sure my body is removed of impurities, my clothing is removed of impurities, and the place I'm going to pray upon is removed of impurities. Now, once that is done, now I can yatawadda, yataghassal, I can do all of those wonderful things. So the order, tankisat, the order here is important. So don't think like, oh, I'm going to do all these acts of obedience to Allah and pray all these extra prayers, but I haven't dealt with what? The dhunub. I haven't dealt with the al-ma'asi. I haven't dealt with what? Al-Razzāq. I haven't dealt with these things first. So do those first, and inshallah, Allah Ta'ala will give you the tawfiq then to do the tahnit al-nafs, inshallah. We ask Allah to give us tawfiq, and نسأل الله عز وجل توفقنا inshallah بهذا الأمر. May Allah Ta'ala give us success in this endeavor to indeed purify our souls for His sake in this life and in the next. وصلواته وسلامه على النبي الكريم وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين والحمد لله رب العالمين والجزاكم